What is up, my Shadowverse soldiers, and welcome back to another Shadowverse Evolved video. Alright, soldiers, I am back from BSF Philly, and of course, if you want to hear about my experience, I will talk about it at the end of the video. This video might be a little bit longer, but that is okay. But in this video, we're going to be doing the Dragoncraft breakdown, and we already know what version of Dragoncraft we are going to be talking about in this collab set, because this is going to be the boogeyman of all the decks. Alright, but before I get on into rambling the deck, let's go ahead and get into our intro for Anverse Academy. Alright, so if you already didn't know what the boogeyman was going to be in this deck, this was going to be Kagero. So this Kagero deck is going to be the strongest deck to come out of the Vanguard set. It is one of the best decks to be played. It has a very good late game, definitely slow tempo, but it's able to really keep up with the pace out of all the Vanguard decks, and it's just very strong. Now, before we continue with any part of the video, we're going to let everybody know that Vortex Dragon is limited to one, so you can only include one of them into your deck until further notice. But getting into the pros and cons of the deck, so for pros, we have big bodies, tons of removal, free/reduced plays, and then is the best of the Vanguard collab. And while on the other hand, we have the cons, which is slow tempo, hand size, little to draw, and then it has a starter requirement. Alright, so our first big point here is big bodies. So like Vortex Dragon we just looked at, you can use 5 play points to spend 5 to get a 6/6 body on the board. Now, if our opponent's going on to 5, especially playing in the Vanguard class, there aren't many cards that just hard remove things. So imagine Vortex Dragon is played on 5 and it's like, okay, I can't take care of this thing on 5. I'm only able to reduce his damage by a certain amount, and then you have to take 6 to the face next turn on top of whatever storm damage that dragon might have for you. Well, of course, using Vortex Dragon as another example, Vortex Dragon is the 5 cost that is able to be a 6/6 body, and then it's able to be used to banish 3 Kagero followers, and then you're able to remove 2 followers off the field. Which actually brings us into our next point. So this deck has tons of removal. There's lots of ways you can use followers to either ping 2, ping 3, or even sometimes divide it between 4 between 2 followers. There's lots of removal in this deck when playing. And on the other hand, in removal, of course, we can use our bodies as well to remove as long as they have rush, which will also bring us into our next point with the free and reduced plays. Now, I can't speak for everybody, I'm going to be honest in that, but personally for me, I enjoy free/reduced. So the one thing we will be enjoying in this deck is when we go to play a singular follower, we will be looking at the top 5 or top 4 of our deck, and we're going to be putting a follower from our deck into our EX area to be either free or reduced so we can continue with our plays to build bodies on the board. And then lastly, we have the best of Vanguard. So this is the best Vanguard deck you can pick up. It is the most competitive. Unfortunately, there isn't any more events as of right now, and so recording this video, so I'm sorry about that. But if you really do want to, gather around and you really do enjoy Vanguard, this is the best you can see in Vanguard for Shadowverse Evolved. Now on the downside, we have the cons, and of course, the deck can't be perfect, so there are some downsides on playing the deck. Alright, so starting off with the first con, we have slow tempo. So, of course, with the free reduced plays I was talking about, you're only going to be putting a maximum of 2 bodies on the board. Getting up until like turn 6 and turn 7, like there's only a max of you playing 1 body on the board, and that's hoping that your opponent can't remove it so you can swing in with some storm damage because there is no ramp in the deck. So with there being no ramp in the deck, you're really just playing at the same pace as everybody else in Shadowverse Evolved. That's not really how Dragoncraft wants to really function. They really want to be ahead of the curve. Of course, they won't have much of a hand size, but they'll be ahead in play points, so they're able to play their big bodies and play multiple bodies on the board in one turn. Which of course, that leads into our next 2 points is hand size and little to draw. So when we're committing to these bigger plays of playing these big bodies on board, we're only going to be drawing maybe 1 or 2 cards, just because these cards are not going to be drawing us cards at all. We're going to be hitting these drive triggers or drive checks, and hopefully we're going to be able to hit the drive trigger or maybe the heal or the crit. We're honestly going to want to hit crit triggers at most as possible, just because we want to make our bodies very big, because we do have storm followers in the deck. But unlike in the last video with the Abysscraft, there aren't cards that maybe draw 3 cards or draw 2 cards unless they're attached to, discarding a card and then, replenishing your hand in a way. And then lastly, we have the starter requirement. So I don't really want to count this as a con just because you can go ahead and get a good head start. But mind you, if you are new to Shadowverse Evolve, having the starter requirement is something that you're going to need for the deck, and it's just like a knowledge check thing. It's not, oh, I want to get into Kagero, I'm new. What do I need to pick up? You need to make sure you get the starter deck, which of course I don't know how much they are going to be printing as like the future continues. So the starter deck might be a little bit harder to obtain, but you do need the starter requirement if you do want to play Kagero. All right, so let's talk about our dragons for the deck. All right, so looking at our big boss monster, so we have Dragonic Overlord the End, so it's a 7-cost 6/6. It has Storm Ward and Twin Drive, so it's able to drive check twice. When it comes into play, if there's a Dragonic Overlord in your cemetery, you recover 1 play point, and then it has a strike ability to spend 3 play points to discard a Dragonic Overlord at the end to refresh this follower. You can also activate by banishing 5 Kagero cards from your cemetery to destroy each other follower on the field. Alright, so mind yourself, soldiers, whenever you go for this activate ability, mind you that you need to have no cards on your field because you're going to be getting rid of followers on your field as well. So if you have followers on your field, make sure you swing with them first if they're stale so they can get the most out of their damage, and then make sure you go for this ability to clear your opponent's board and yours. And then looking next up, we have Burning Horn Dragon, which is a 2-cost 3/2 with Rush, and if there's a follower with Overlord in its name on your field, you can give this follower +2/+2. Whenever a follower on your field performs a drive check, you can select enemy leader or an enemy follower on the field and then deal it 1 damage. So this is going to be one of the good points we were talking about on the deck. If you have Dragonic Overlord on field, or at least an Overlord follower on field, then you can turn this follower into a 5/4, so that's a pretty big body for spending for 2. And then whenever you perform a drive check, which you should be doing a lot in Vanguard, you're going to be dealing 1 damage to either the enemy leader or to an enemy follower, which can stack up a lot with one of the followers we will be looking at in the future. And now I will say that this card isn't in every build, but it is something to look at. So we have the Seal Dragon Blockade, which is a 2-cost 3/2, and during your turn when an opponent plays a spell, you deal 2 damage to the leader, and once on each of your turns when a Kagero card you control deals ability damage to an enemy follower on the field, you draw a card. Now I'm gonna be honest, soldiers, I personally would put Seal Dragon Blockade in the tech section of the deck just because there's only certain matchups where you're really going to benefit off of burning their leader for 2, or if you manage to have Seal Dragon on the field and then having another Kagero card that's going to be dealing ability damage to get you to draw a card, are just scenarios that you won't really see often in the Kagero deck. Alright, so let's talk about our starting amulets, and of course we have our basic ones that are the Lizard Runner and the Stardust Trumpeter that come in starter decks that give the Vanguard +1/+1, but we have the Lizard Soldier Conrode, which is the 2-cost starting amulet, which you can bury to make sure you can deal 1 damage to an enemy follower in the field, which are scenarios that are pretty cool, but I think honestly going for the starter deck starter amulets are actually the better ones here. Alright, so these are the triggers of the deck. So I will say that there are 2 triggers that are very important for certain deck archetypes that you want to be building into Kagero, and that's the Gatling Claw Dragon and the Embodiment of Spear Tahar. Now we won't be talking about the card that requires Gatling Claw Dragon because I don't feel like it's very useful to the Kagero build. But if you do want to go in that direction, there is a card that needs Gatling Claw Dragon in the cemetery to be able to evolve. But now on the other hand, with Embodiment of Spear Tahar, there is a card that we are going to be using in every build for Kagero that needs him in the cemetery, so we can either be playing him for 2 to swing into a follower, or we can manage to hit this on the drive check and give a follower an extra 2 attack. Alright, so let's talk about our early game. So we have lots of cards to play for 1, and that's not usually something that we see in Dragoncraft. So Kagero having some, early tempo here is pretty cool. Of course, mind you, this is slow tempo, but this is going to be pretty decent tempo at that. Alright, so looking at our first card, we have Follower Rhea, so she's a 1-cost 1/1, we can ride her for 2, but on drive you can give this follower +1/+1, and you can search your deck for a Kagero follower and reveal it and add it to your hand. So of course this is going to be useful for any part in the game. Of course, committing a total of 3 play points to get any follower that is Kagero from your deck and adding it to your hand will come very useful later on in the game if you need it. Alright, next up we have Flame of Promise Armos, that's a 1-cost 2/2. When it comes into play, reveal a follower with Overlord in its name from your hand and then you draw a card. So basically having a 1-cost 2/2 Goblin is pretty cool, while also being able to reveal an Overlord follower if you manage to have it in your opening hand, which of course building it into tempo, it's very nice to go ahead and replace this card into your hand. And then mind you, this can turn into a 3/3 on the first turn as long as you have that Kagero follower on field to make this a nice 1-cost 3/3 that your opponent might have a little bit harder time removing. And of course, we have another small follower over here, which is a 1-cost 2/2, which when it comes into play, you select an enemy follower on the field. If Overflow is active for you, you can deal it 2 damage. And then once on each of your turns, when an enemy follower is put from the field into its cemetery, you draw a card and then discard a card. Now, when we get into the 7 play point range, which is what Overflow is having at least a max of 7 play points, we're not going to really want to be committing the 1 play point into, playing this to deal 2 damage. If you really want to, you can to just, build a big board, which when we get into those 7 play points, if we don't commit to a big body, then we need to, build a whole bunch of bodies on the board. Now with this secondary ability of once on each of your turns, whenever an enemy follower is put into the cemetery, you're able to draw a card or discard a card, get some good filter in, which isn't too bad. But in the early game, you're not really going to be seeing that too much often, just because, people are going to be focusing because they don't want to take 2 damage, or this follower won't be on field because they won't be able to see an enemy follower hit the cemetery. Alright, and then next up we have Dragon Monk Gojo. So it's a 2-cost 2/2. You can ride him for 1, but on drive you give the follower +1/+1, and you look at the top 2 cards of your deck. You may reveal a Kagero follower from among them and add it to your hand, and you put the rest of the bottom in any order. Now if Overflow is active for you, you may reveal and add up to 2 instead. So mind you, when you get into those 7 play points and you're not really seeing too many things, you're able to at least recoup a little bit, just because when we get to those 7 play points, we're not really doing too much out of, playing a big follower and then swinging like we saw with the Dragonic Overlord at the end. But if we have lots of bodies that we can commit to, like spending 3 play points to add 2 cards to our hand, that might really help. And then also, like I said, with the Flame of Hope Armo, by building a board and playing lots of smaller bodies on the field. Alright, so I want to talk about a little bit of value here. So there are some cards that are going to be helping you draw, or at least helping you, just replace itself. And I think these are the cards you really need to look at, because they also come in the form of removal, and then also like heal you in a way, or they're able to stall the game out. Alrighty, and looking at our first card, we have Embodiment of Armor Bahar. So it's the 3-cost 3/4 that draws a card when he's played, and then also has ward. So when he's engaged, they have to attack into him before they attack into your leader. Now mind you, playing this on tempo on turn 3 actually isn't that bad in the Vanguard class, just because there aren't that many followers that are going to be dealing 4 damage on turn 3. So playing this on turn 3 and you're going first, you're actually in a pretty decent position to either warding it up, and if your opponent has followers on field, they need to swing into this before they swing into you, so that's pretty okay. Alright, next up we have Bellicosity Dragon. So it's a 5-cost 4/4. You can evolve it for 1, but on drive you select with 2 enemy followers on the field and you deal 4 damage divided between them, and you give this follower +1/+1. While also playing this follower with its fanfare, you can give your leader +2 defense and drawing a card. So yes, this card might seem a little expensive, but when you're going into some slow controlled tempo, it's not bad to heal yourself for 2 and then replacing them as a card while also getting a 5/5 and then doing a drive check. Alrighty, and the last up we have the Dragonic Executioner, which is a 4-cost 5/5, which I think is actually some pretty good value, because he has Rush, and then when he's played, you discard a Kagero card to draw 2 cards, so you're able to really refill your hand from all the cards you've played, and then you're also able to filter out any Kagero cards that you don't want. Alright, so if Dragonic Overlord, the end, is the top end, I would say that Aleph here is the leg. So this is what'll really get us started on like either turn 3 if we're going second, or going turn 4. Or even in the later games where we're able to actually use this fanfare ability to evolve for free, will really get us some bodies and then some real good traction in the deck. Alright, so looking at Dragon Knight Aleph, so he's a 3-cost 3/3. We can evolve him for 1 into an Embodiment of Victory Aleph, and then when he comes into play, if there's an Embodiment of Armor Bahar and an Embodiment of Spear Tahar in your cemetery, you can evolve this follower into an Embodiment of Victory Aleph. So the cool thing about this is that if we've already evolved for the turn, we can just spend 3 play points. Since it says the fanfare to go ahead and evolve this card, we can go ahead and go into the evolved, and we're not restricted by having only 1 evolve per turn. Now mind you, this only works through skills, so as long as it's in the fanfare that says to evolve this follower, you're able to do it. And then looking at our Embodiment of Victory Aleph, so he turns into a 4/4, and he has Twin Drive, so he's able to form 2 drive checks. But on evolve, you look at the top 3 cards of your deck, you may put a Kagero follower that is not named Dragon Knight Aleph from among them into your EX area. It costs 3 less to play this turn, and then you put the rest of the bottom in any order. So mind you, of course, unless we hit a 3 or less follower on the turn 4 that we play the Dragon Knight and then going ahead and evolving him, then we're only going to be playing those cards for free. But in the later turns, mind you, we're going to have more play points. So even if we're just spending 3 and we have those requirements of having the Embodiment of Armor Bahar and the Embodiment of Spear in our cemetery, we can go ahead and evolve them to a 4/4, and then we'll have those extra play points to play those bigger followers that we can look at. And mind you, they're reduced, so you're able to play those bigger followers on that turn. Alright, so let's get into some removal. So these are the cards that you're probably going to be looking at in terms of removal for getting rid of things. All right, so the first card we're looking at is Berserk Dragon. So it's a 3-cost 3/3. You can ride it for 1, but on drive, you select the enemy following field and then deal it 3 damage. You give this follower +1/+1. When it comes into play, you also discard a Kagura card to select the enemy following field and then deal it 2 damage. So of course, spending a total of 4 play points gets you a 4/4 on the field that does a total of 5 damage through the fanfare and the ride effect, while also getting the 4/4, which will have the drive check, so you can remove a total of 3 things, or 2 things in total. And of course, looking at the Dragon Knight Nahalem, which is a 2-cost 2/2, but on drive, you select up to 1 enemy following the field and then deal it 2 damage while giving this follower +1/+1. But it has a nice cool ability with the strike, so when it swings, you can deal 1 damage to each enemy leader. So of course, only dealing 1 damage, that can be healed, but of course, there are going to be times where our opponent does not heal in game. So being able to deal 1 damage will just go ahead and get us started with that damage going, while also removing a follower on the field. And I think it'll be really helpful if this follower is actually managed to be stale and is able to swing into the enemy leader while also dealing a total of like 4 damage. And then we have Dragon Monk Goku, which is a 6-cost 5/5 with Ward. You can engage him to banish 4 Kagura cards from your cemetery to deal 4 damage to each enemy leader and enemy follower on the field. Now, it's going to be one annoying thing if our opponent is going to manage to flood the board with these followers. Well, when they flood the board, sometimes their defense might be less than 5, so being able to play Dragon Monk here and then engaging them by getting rid of those Kagura cards we're going to be pitching and then using from the field from effects, and our opponent's going to be matching our energy in terms of removal. Just going ahead and getting rid of 4 Kagura cards to deal 4 to face and then 4 to board is pretty good, while also having the ward for defense. Now, if I said that Dragonic Overlord, the end, was the head of the deck and then Aleph was the feet, I will say the regular Dragonic Overlord is the heart of the deck. So the thing about Dragonic Overlord is that this card is just going to be good as long as you have another Kagura on field and you're over those 7 play points. Just because this is going to be a 5/5 Storm follower, which is a little insane, I will say. But on Evolve, you can select the enemy following field and then deal it 5 damage. And if Overflow is active for you for the rest of this turn, this follower has once per turn. When this follower deals combat damage, you refresh it. Now, I do want to give soldiers a warning that this is a card with an errata on it, but I do believe all the copies that are printed out to us have the correct text. If that is not correct, let me know in the comment section below so we can, gather the correct information so everybody has the stuff. But this card did have an errata, but it has the correct text here with the once per turn when this follower deals combat damage, refresh it, just because if you're swinging into a follower multiple times that doesn't have big defense, or big attack, to swing into this follower to remove it one time, you can just keep swinging into stuff and then refreshing it. So we wanted to make sure you only do that once and you're able to do drive check at least twice. But still, this card being able to deal 5 damage to a follower just being evolved, as long as we just evolve it, and then if Overflow is active, we can take care of another follower, which is going to do that damage to get the twin drive and 2 drive checks, which will also go in tandem with Burning Horn, because every time we do a drive check, we can deal 1 damage to enemy follower and 1 damage to enemy leader, whatever our choice is. So if we have Burning Horn Dragon and the Dragonic Overlord on the field, we're going to be doing a lot in 1 turn. Alright, so let's talk about the tech for the deck. So these are the cards that I do believe aren't in every build, but they're pretty techy and they're pretty useful in the build if you want to use them. So these are some things that you can look at. So of course we have the 1-cost quick spell, the Wyvern Guard Berry, which is just the snipe for the deck, but if we could discard a Kagura card, we can deal 3 damage to a follower and then deal 1 damage to its leader. And then we have Chain Attack Sutherland, which I do believe is something I would recommend in putting in just regular builds, honestly, just because it can give a Vanguard follower that +3 attack, so we can swing for more damage. Now, I will say this next card is pretty techy. I think it's more on control things, but there's followers that are really big. So spending 3 play points in quick time to deal 3 damage to a follower on field is just pretty good in my opinion. Already in the last we have Powers Converge, which is a 3-cost spell for the Vanguard deck. So if you have those 3 face-up drive points in your deck, you're actually able to choose all 3 of the abilities by either doing the 1, select enemy follower in the field and then dealing a 4 damage, or 2, selecting a follower in the cemetery and adding it to your hand, or 3, giving your leader +4 defense. But like I said earlier, as long as you have all 3 face up, you're actually able to do all 3. But if you just only are playing it for 3 and you don't have those face up drive points, then you can only do 1. Alright, so getting into the grade of the deck, of course we're going to look at some previous deck lists, of course, the ones that they recommended to us from the website, and then the ones that are actually topping in events. So we will have some good insight on what this deck is, but by means, this will be the best grade out of all the Vanguard decks we will be talking about. Alright, so this is the deck that is recommended on the website. It actually has the actual starter amulet that is for the actual deck. I do recommend you go with the starter deck one, just because you can give that Vanguard follower the +1/+1. And when you play these big bodies in this deck, you can make them even bigger. So I think going for that amulet is a lot better. And here is an example of the deck. Of course, you're going to be running the 3 of staples that you're going to need, like the Aleph and the Dragon Overlord at the end, and then the Dragonic Overlord just so you can see them, of course. But this is just a basic build, of course, you know, play around with the 1-drop ratios. I have 2 and 2 just so you can play around with them. But, you know, of course, I will have the deck code in the description below if you want to check that out. Alright, so getting back into the grade of the deck, you should already know that this deck is definitely an S tier deck. Like, it is definitely the best deck to come out of the Vanguard collab set, and if you were to choose any deck to play competitively, it would be this one. But unfortunately, in the English version of Shadowverse Evolved, we didn't have any of the competitive events being like single events. They were all team events, so Kagero didn't really get its like time to shine as its solo time. And if it did, then, you know, let me know in the comments below if you guys already know information like that. But I know there were a lot more solo events in JP, so Kagero was really able to like really flex its skin, and also on top of the Vortex Dragon wasn't limited to 1, so it was really able to still fly. But I do think that this deck is still the best choice out of all the Vanguard decks. And alright soldiers, that is it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. I am very excited that we're able to go over Kagero and many things like that. Of course, there are other cards that we didn't talk about, but those aren't going to really be too important in terms of like the Kagero deck. Those aren't really cards you're going to be seeing. It's just I wanted to cover over the cards that you would most likely be seeing in the build and whatever matchup, you know, stuff like that, with a couple tech cards and whatnot. But, you know, that's what I really want to do in terms of like Inverse Academy, is just have everyone educated, knowing what these decks are going to be doing, even if you don't purchase them. But alright soldiers, I did say I was going to talk about my BSF experience, so we're going to sit on this little page for a little bit. We didn't do too well, we scrubbed out, but we were all in there for good fun. We met a whole bunch of beautiful people that were able to express their love for Shadowverse Evolved, and maybe some new people too. I did battle a couple of new players that played within the 2 months, which I really do like seeing for Shadowverse Evolved, that we're still getting new people. But it is pretty scary too, because we're still the new kid on the block, and it's been like 2 years. And like people are like saying, oh, well, what's Shadowverse after, you know, the game's been out this long? So I feel like there's definitely that missing marketing there in terms of like getting people to know that Shadowverse Evolved is like a physical card game. Because I know people are just constantly rolling in, figuring out what this card game is. And we're kind of in a weird position in terms of like the market of having cards accessible to like new players versus like having like more access to like, I'm trying to put it into perspective. Like everybody, if you want to get into Shadowverse, like the game is still like relatively cheap in comparison to other games, but like it's kind of hard to get into it because like, let's say you enjoy Swordcraft, and I'm going to use this example all the time because this card is very expensive. Like if you want to get into Swordcraft and you want to play Token Sword, you're going to need Celia Sky Commander. If you know how much Celia Sky Commander costs right now, she costs an arm and a leg. So like even people in the other regions, of course, like in Europe, that already have problems obtaining cards, like now in NA we're having problems obtaining cards because they're just like so expensive, because like, you know, why am I, you know, shelling out this much for one card? Now of course, if you have the funds and you have the money, pay for whatever you want to. I feel the freedom, it's your money, do whatever you want with it. But I do feel like someone who's just like a consumer wants to get the most out of every single dollar that they pay for. So, you know, I don't find it like okay spending all that money for like one card. But getting back into the experience, so there were a couple ups and downs. So my teammate Chris, he brought a Dragon Ball mat, and I didn't know that there was like a copyright thing going on. So he brought his mat and they told him to flip his mat over due to copyright. And I was like, okay, well, you know, I guess he's gonna play on the bottom side of his mat, you know, which has been touching all sorts of like crazy things. So I hope he didn't have a problem with that. But there was also the sleeve problem. I was seeing a lot of people having like a whole sleeve like issue. And it's kind of different because I would come from Bandai events and they weren't really like too like strict on that. Like as long as you had Dragon Shields, or as long as your sleeves could like cover the card and make sure like, you know, it's not like marked or anything, you were straight good and golden. But I did see a Facebook post that was like concerning in terms of like someone voicing their opinion on how they felt in terms of like all these like rules and handlings. And I do actually want to do some research after the next video, which I will be posting today as well. That'll be Pale Moon. But I do want to look into some insight on like why things are just like so hard, because I'm not gonna lie to you, like I'm pretty sure the judge looked at my mat and the mat was a kill mat, but I don't think it was an official Bushiroad mat. But they couldn't confirm it because like, you know, they had the White Schwartz thing and like Kill la Kill So I'm feeling like there wasn't really like any confirmation. But if anybody has any good sources of information on like, you know, why the copyright is what it is, or something I can read up on so I can make sure everybody is prepared for these events, because I'd hate for somebody to come to this event and have a terrible time just because, oh, you know, the judge narked me because my sleeves were, you know, not Bushiroad official, and I had to pay the extra $15, which, you know, some people don't even have that $15 on hand just because the tournament's free. But, you know, like just being able to be DQ'd from your sleeves, and they were like maybe just like not Bushiroad official, but they were just like cool sleeves that they had with over sleeves. They still marked the card and it did what it was supposed to do, but they weren't able to play just because of copyright. But of course, ending off on a positive note, I am glad that I was able to see a lot of people from the Discord that we usually saw. It was good to see some people that are up in the top tables, like, doing very well. I love seeing competitive Shadowverse. Pretty good games. I had some good records. So for my record, so our team, we were Nephthys Abyss, I was on D-Shift Chess, and then our buddy Chris, he was on the Amulet Haven. So I won every game except my last one. Like, I was like pretty much undefeated, but unfortunately our team lost every game. So you know, it happens. So we weren't able to win like every match. I think we won one match, but it was bye-bye from like DQ because two people had the same Vanguard Universe class deck and they weren't able to do that. So we got one win there, but unfortunately, maybe if it was like a solo event, I could have done better. But I did have a good time playing with all three of them, and you know, just being able to converse with different personalities is what I really do enjoy about TCGs. But of course, soldiers, I don't want to talk your head off about the entire BCF experience. You know, if you want, I can put it into an entire separate video and we can talk everything about the copyrights once I get all the information down, but that's only if you guys want to see it. If not, that's okay. But anyways, make sure you are safe in whatever you do tonight, and make sure you are safe in whatever you do for the rest of the year. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.
Yeah. TRINN. Just to get you away. What I got to do, what I got to do.